Now welcome to another Thor Thunderstorm video, which means I'm going to try and answer a bunch of questions that I have got over the last week or so. And there has indeed been a bunch of them. There has been a ton of them. So thank you for that. Though it also means I, of course, will not be able to answer all of them or even close to it. So if I don't get to yours, don't take it personally. It's not that I found it a bad question. Mainly I'm going to be picking at random here. I just clipped out any comment that started with "Hey Thor," and I'm going to pick and choose, again, pretty much at random here. And the vast majority of them are about the Acolyte in some way, shape, or form. But there are some about other things as well, so hopefully this will be a good mixture in the end. But anyway, let's start with this question or comment from Cypher10, who said, "Hey Thor, I think people are just predisposed to hating anything Disney puts out at this point. As soon as trailers come out, they get downvoted, ratioed to hell, when nothing in the actual trailer warrants it. As for the Acolyte in particular, people have been wanting to hate on this show ever since it was announced years ago, and Brie Larson was rumored to be the main character. It never had a chance, even if it was great." And wow, I don't even remember the Brie Larson rumors attached to this. I remember she posted on Twitter or X or Instagram, whatever it was, how she wanted to be a Jedi. She posted a picture of herself all dressed up in a robe and whatever. But anyway, I would say that we first have to keep in mind, and I was talking about this in yesterday's video and even the day before, I think, about how it's not like the hate for Disney Star Wars has just kind of come out of nowhere. It's not like it manifested from the ether. It's not like fans are waking up and saying to themselves, "I'm just going to start hating on Star Wars today." Basically, there is a reason why fans are hating on Star Wars, and I don't even like to use that word. Sure, some people go too far and you could call it hate. But most people are just being very critical of something that they are very passionate about. Something they have loved and enjoyed for decades, potentially. And also keep in mind, Disney is asking you to pay for this, right? They are asking you to pay money to watch Star Wars, and thus I think that gives you every right to be very critical of it. Not to mention, as I have said many, many times before, the fans are actually what Disney paid all that money for. They didn't pay $4 billion for Star Wars itself. They don't really care about Star Wars. They care about having a built-in audience with the content that they're going to be putting out. They paid for a guaranteed return on that investment, right? And that's what they see the fans as. They see the fans as a guaranteed return. They know fans are going to watch it. They know fans are going to buy their merchandise. That is what they paid all that money for. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say George Lucas didn't enjoy the money he made off of Star Wars either. He certainly knew how to merchandise. But at least he cared about the story, right? At least he cared about Star Wars, and that's one of the problems with Disney Star Wars. You don't feel that same level of care from the one owning it anymore. Yes, there are people at Lucasfilm who love it, who are passionate about it, but now it just feels like content instead of great stories. That's the biggest problem with Star Wars. It feels like content for the sake of content, not here's a story because I think this is a good story. But anyway, to go back to the comment before I keep rambling, every new trailer doesn't get downvoted to oblivion, actually. If you look at some of the other ones besides the Acolyte, like Ahsoka came out recently, The Bad Batch came out recently, Mando Season 3, anything that's been somewhat recently, they're not actually downvoted or have a terrible ratio. I think this happened to the Acolyte mainly because of who the showrunner is. I think it mainly happened because of Leslie Headland. I don't really want to go into the whole thing, but of course she was the personal assistant of Harvey Weinstein, and a lot of people feel like that is not someone who should be involved with Star Wars. You can agree, you can disagree. We don't know what she knew, we don't know what she didn't know about what he did, but that is a big part of the reason why this show has received a lot of hate beforehand. It's not just that people are going to hate on Star Wars because they're going to hate on it or anything like that. It's because they're actually very disappointed that she is involved with it. But anyway, let's move on to another comment, and this one will come from Goddess of Whim 2023, who asked, "Hey Thor, someone pointed this out. Where's Yoda and the Jedi Council? Yoda was 900 years old when he passed away during Return of the Jedi. This is 100 years before Anakin, so Yoda would definitely be around as a Jedi. Do you think the Council and Yoda's presence would help or hinder this series? I hope you see this." At this point, maybe it's a good thing we're not seeing Yoda or anyone else in the council. Maybe they're not going to be implicated in whatever is going on some 16 years before the present tense of the story. Whatever happened to the witches, where they seem to be massacred by somebody. If this is the Jedi, maybe it all gets covered up by some of them or something like that, and the council never finds out, and so they're not, again, not implicated, not associated with whatever is going on here. Now, I don't think that's exactly what you're asking. I think you're asking, would it make more sense or would it be kind of nice or cool to see Yoda and the Council in this? And honestly, it would make sense, right? Some would no doubt just call it nostalgia bait or whatever, but it would make sense that if this is something where the Jedi are encountering the Sith or a dark side cult, that the Council would be brought into the mix and would be involved with whatever's going on. But again, it's probably a good thing that they're not, because they can't be implicated in whatever is going on here. All right, and now we're going to move on to this one from Master Odaiwin, who said, "Hey Thor, what are your thoughts on if we find out that these kids are the reason for why Anakin was too old to train?" I think they already mentioned in one of the episodes, maybe the first episode, that Osha was a sort of exception, that even though she was too old, that they were training her anyway, or trained her anyway. Now, it might have reinforced that belief, but it won't be the root cause of it, if that makes sense. All right, now this one from Master Zero, who asked, "Hey Thor, what do you want the Acolyte to be about?" Well, honestly, I don't have a problem with the original or initial idea behind it. The idea that we have the Sith kind of operating in the background, and maybe one of them gets a little cocky and kind of pokes their head out and causes some mischief. I don't think that's a bad premise for a show at this point in time. And then you could have a Jedi kind of investigating it, and no one else is kind of really taking what he's doing seriously. He eventually finds the Sith, and there's a big fight, and he ends up dying, and the Sith keep their secret. I mean, it's kind of a generic idea. You could obviously do a lot more with it. But again, I don't really hate this idea of doing something with this time period. I think you want to tread carefully, because we're in Plagueis territory. And he is, whether or not you've read his book or not that he wrote it, but the book about him. But you do want to tread carefully in this time period and around that character, because he kind of has this mythical status because of his mention in Revenge of the Sith and the cool story we hear about him. But yeah, overall, not opposed to the idea of this. I think you would, you'd want to be careful about what you have the Jedi discover, or how you deal with a Jedi who discovers something. And I think you could mix in some Plagueis and some other stuff, like Tenebrous, for example, who was the master to Plagueis. There's an idea here. I just don't think this is working yet. All right, and now we move on to a comment or question here from Pedro Zor, who asked, "Hey Thor, the problem is that these opinions don't matter. Current Hollywood assumes, and it's right on that fans will watch the content regardless of quality. Current Hollywood just wants to make more money, so fans are taken for granted, and the focus is the new mythical, modern audience that makes noise in news outlets and Twitter. We have to understand that we are not the priority, and that the focus is a different group. Hollywood needs to make more content to make more money. That is the beginning and end of it." And yeah, I agree with you, and I talked about it before, that of course Disney kind of takes the fans for granted, and that's a general thing across Hollywood. Anybody who owns a big franchise is probably kind of taking their fans for granted. And I do agree to a point that it is just about cranking out more and more content. I was also saying that before, but it does get to a point, and even Bob Iger, the CEO of Disney, he's talked about how we're making too much, that we can't just put out anything and expect fans to watch it. And this goes along with the fact that, last I heard, that Disney Plus still is not profitable, still not making money. They're still pumping more money into the content than they obviously generate. And so it's not just about making content, or it shouldn't be. That's kind of the approach they had. That's what they thought when they bought Star Wars or Marvel or whatever it might be. You just have to make it and it prints its own money. I don't think that's the case. And I think slowly but surely they're beginning to realize that. And the question now has to become, how do they react? Do they just continue on? Do they actually try to listen to what fans are saying, even the hateful, negative ones? Or what? How do they respond to what's going on? How do they respond to the fact that they can't seem to make money off of these franchises? And sure, we can debate if they have or haven't. I have seen arguments both ways. I've seen people try to lay out the numbers and say they have lost money on Star Wars. Some people try to say they have made a ton of money off Star Wars. I don't know what the truth is, but as we keep talking about, they want to make money. So you would think they would take the path that would lead them to making the most money. And what is that path exactly? Is it listening to fans? Is it trying to produce quality content in maybe a smaller amount? Or is it just cranking anything and everything out there to be consumed by whatever audience they think they have? I'm very curious to see what the future of this is going to be, especially if shows like The Acolyte and whatever comes next, or the new movies in a few years, if they don't do particularly well, how will Disney and Lucasfilm respond? Alright, and moving right along, we now have a comment from Severitus who asked, "Hey Thor, I'm inclined to be cynical about the idea that the hate is for good reasons. The show Acolytes, which has nothing to do with the Acolyte, got review bombed as a result of everything going on. Moreover, my entire life I have been told by others that Star Wars is ruined and is dead, and yet we get more Star Wars. I think that part of the problem here is that there are such widely different ideas of what Star Wars should be, and nothing can satisfy everyone." And I mean, obviously nothing is going to satisfy absolutely everybody. There's never going to be a piece of Star Wars content, be it a movie, film, whatever, that every single fan is going to like, or that even the vast majority are going to like. There are always going to be people unhappy with what you do with Star Wars. Though I do think you can make Star Wars that a whole lot of people are going to like, or that very few are going to have genuine issues with. And so the question then becomes, how do you pull that off? How do you make Star Wars that people aren't going to be angry at or try to tear down? And I think that's the key, or the way to look at it. I think there are people more along the lines that they are upset about what it gets used for, rather than this is what they think it should be, if that makes sense. It's not so much that they're not open to new ideas or new things being explored or new types of content, as much as they think this isn't what Star Wars should be, or it shouldn't be made this particular way. For example, I am someone who firmly believes that balance in Star Wars is not equal parts darkness and light. I think that's a ridiculous notion. I think it is ridiculous to in any way imply we need a certain amount of evil in order to balance out good. I mean, how would that even look practically or logically when you really think about it? How do you play that out? And so when something like the Acolyte seems to be playing with this idea that, good and evil are really just points of view, which, yeah, Palpatine says that in the prequels, but Palpatine is the bad guy. I think people tend to forget that. He's trying to manipulate Anakin. He's saying what he needs to say to turn someone to the dark side. And so anyway, when a show like The Acolyte seems to be playing with this idea that the witches are only bad from a certain point of view, that it is only wrong to use the dark side sometimes, I don't like that idea in Star Wars. I think that is a bad idea to present. I don't want to see Star Wars slip into some weird moral relativism franchise, essentially, where there's only gray and nothing definitively good and evil. For me, that's not a way to explore Star Wars. For me, that is it becoming something else. Alright, and now on to this question from Shine Dark, who asked, "Hey Thor, I'm curious what you think about this. I've read some EU legend stories that imply or state that those who use the light side while embracing their love and bonds with others develop a boost in power equal or greater to the kind of boost embracing the dark side grants, just without the mental and physical degradation that legend shows comes with the dark side. It's shown in both stories involving Revan post-redemption and with Luke's new Jedi Order, as if to imply the way Luke's order does things is the right way of doing things, whereas the Jedi of the past were unintentionally stifling their own development by refusing to learn how to have attachments without becoming possessive. That's the message I got from those stories anyway. Just curious if you think the concept does or doesn't fit with Star Wars." And honestly, especially in the context of Star Wars, I think they're kind of synonymous. I think they kind of mean the same thing. I think if you are attached to something or someone, you're kind of possessive of it. Though that said, I don't really have a problem with Jedi trying to learn how to love something. I mean, that's what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to love people around them. They're supposed to have compassion, kind of this unconditional love for everybody. So I don't really have a problem with the idea of them trying to learn to be more loving and not leading to attachment or possessiveness. Again, I think those are kind of the same words anyway. Though this might just be my Luke, Mara, Jade bias kind of showing how much I enjoyed that story before we knew attachments were even a thing in Star Wars, before the prequels ever came out. Their kind of romance and marriage happened. Either way, like I've said before, one of the things I think would have been interesting for the sequel trilogy to explore is the idea of attachment and possessiveness, and how far is too far? Like, where is the line? Can a Jedi truly try to love another person more on the individual level as someone they care about in particular? Or does that always lead to problems? Or, I mean, in all reality, it's probably the individual, right? We all have different levels of attachment that we form. Some of us get really attached really easily. Others never really get attached to other people. And so again, I think that was an interesting thing to potentially explore in the sequel trilogy. I don't really have a problem with Jedi developing strong friendships and relationships with other people. I think that is implied that they do that. It's hard to have a master and Padawan relationship, for example, which is kind of a surrogate parent-child type relationship when you really think about it. I think the main reason why Jedi just swear off attachments or any kind of possessive relationship or anything that would be borderline is just it's easier to do that than to try and determine who can handle it and who can't. That if we just have this blanket rule where nobody gets to have attachments, then we're going to be okay. Okay, and let's now move on to this comment from Seriously Black, who asked, "Hey Thor, I'm calling it now. Coral, the birth mother, has survived the events of the episode and will be revealed as the faux Sith in the final episode." I could certainly see that. I did notice we didn't see her body amongst all the other witches, so I think there's a chance that's the case. I think that could even explain why this isn't the Sith at all, why this isn't on the radar of the Jedi, why they don't 100 years later say, well, we saw the Sith like 100 years ago, and that's because it is simply this witch coven that has gone awry, that it was Coral all along. She gets unmasked Scooby-Doo style at some point, and they find out, well, it was just these witches, it wasn't actually like the return of the Sith. So again, 100 years later, they're not really thinking about this particular incident as being the Sith returning before. Alright, and now onto this question from Bug Rib, who asked, "Hey Thor, not really a question, but I think you're one of the most reasonable and fair Star Wars YouTubers out there, but I feel like you're nitpicking things about this show that have so many possible reasonable explanations that don't need to be explicitly laid out for any storytelling reason. I honestly don't think you're being as objective as you think you're being. I think the show is actually pretty exceptional, but that's just my humble opinion." And well, in all reality, all my videos really are my humble opinion too. I mean, you say that the Acolyte is pretty exceptional. I completely disagree with that, but I respect your opinion. And I think that's where people maybe get this notion that I am being objective all the time, or that it's my goal to be objective all the time, when in reality, I think it would be kind of boring if all I ever did was be 100% objective about everything. I mean, yes, I want people to come to their own conclusions, and because of that, I will give counter arguments to my own points at times. I will give other points of view about things, but in all reality, I am laying out my subjective opinion most of the time about things. I just do it in a way that doesn't try to state it as definitive fact, I guess. I don't think that just because I do YouTube videos and people watch me that I am some authority on Star Wars. Yeah, I may try to come off that way a little bit, because if I was always second-guessing and questioning everything I presented, people would say, well, what's the point? This guy doesn't even believe anything he's saying. And so I do get this reputation of being objective and being fair, which I try to be fair, but I don't know that I always try to be objective. I don't think those are the same thing. And so anyway, yeah, I am just giving my opinion on the Acolyte while also presenting some objective facts or some objective positions or counter positions to my own. I'm not going to be 100% objective all the time. Again, that is not even exactly my goal here. Alright, let's get to this one now from Civil Maniac, who asked, "Hey Thor, what changes would you make to the original trilogy?" Nothing, really. I don't think I would change anything about them. And I'm not sure if you're kind of asking if I would maybe change things to align better with the prequels, potentially, which kind of recontextualize Star Wars. I mean, the prequels really just kind of change your perception of the original trilogy. Suddenly Anakin is the chosen one. Suddenly we know things about attachments. And so if you're asking would I maybe make changes to the original trilogy in order to align with that better? I mean, if I had to, I think we could. I don't know that I would, because I just don't want to change the films. Same kind of goes for the prequels. I've done videos where I suggest changes or what I would have done, but those are all in good fun. I wouldn't actually want to see those movies changed for any reason. Alright, next up, CTS Guitar asked, "Hey Thor, who do you think will be the successor to Kathleen Kennedy? Favreau, Filoni, or other?" I'm going to say other, and I don't have a guess as to who that other is even going to be, because it is probably going to be someone we could never guess at, someone that is not exactly on the Star Wars radar, if you will. It is probably going to be some kind of Hollywood exec, and we have to hope that whoever it is comes in and figures this thing out, that rights the ship and can crank out good Star Wars while also keeping Disney happy. As for why I don't think Favreau or Filoni, well, I think Filoni probably doesn't have that type of experience. I don't know that they would let him run the company. As for Favreau, I don't know that he wants to do that. I don't know that he's ever expressed any interest in that sort of thing. Maybe he has. I don't know. He's never struck me as someone who wants to run Lucasfilm as much as someone who just likes to make the content, actually, to tell stories and make movies. I don't know. Could be wrong. could be underestimating his ambition, perhaps, or his desire to be the head of Star Wars, or the head of Lucasfilm, which is basically the head of Star Wars. But yeah, anyway, my guess is other, and by other, I mean other. We're not even going to know or guess as to who that other person is going to be that comes in to run Lucasfilm. All right, next up is from SQ Roberts, who asked, "Hey Thor, not a question, but a comment, mostly referring to the idea that Star Wars is made for kids. I substitute part-time for the local school system, and I just wanted to say that the upcoming generation are not getting into Star Wars near as much as the prequel generation, did. As much as some people dogged the prequels, I could always find other kids my age still obsessed with it pretty easily. However, now, in all grades, at least in my area, the overwhelming thought on Star Wars is that it's some goofy, boring nerd crap. And though I really wish I could say that surprises me that it wasn't so even, but I think when it comes to this generation, this one just kind of growing up now or coming of age now, or maybe in their early 20s even, I think they are a Marvel generation. I do not think they are a Star Wars generation. I'm not saying none of them are. I personally know some people in their early 20s or late teens that love Star Wars. Certainly there are exceptions, but the rule, I think, is that Marvel is this generation's Star Wars. All right, and now time for one final question, and I really feel like I've hardly answered any questions at all. I think I have a ton of them left. Maybe I'll try to make these even longer. I don't know. But for now, final question comes to us from Richard Robinson, who asked, "Hey Thor, my personal take on Star Wars content has always been, does it make the end of Return of the Jedi more, less, or the same significance? Does Anakin saving Luke and destroying the Emperor matter? Does the Empire ending matter? Does bringing balance to the Force have any lasting impact? Does Luke throwing down his lightsaber and knowing that killing an unarmed person is wrong matter? With the sequel trilogy, it obviously didn't. Am I being too myopic? Love your content." Maybe slightly to a degree, but I certainly get your point and I agree with it. Because, I mean, there are things that go well beyond the scope of the original trilogy. You could go Old Republic, you could go theoretically 1,000 years in the future. And in theory, those things wouldn't really impact everything you mentioned. Yet at the same time, I feel like that is and always should be kind of the core Star Wars story. And so I think anytime you create a new story, you do have to ask yourself those questions. Does what I'm making here, does that impact the foundation of Star Wars itself? And if so, is it a positive or negative impact that I'm having? And so again, I do agree yet kind of disagree, because some things I think are just so well beyond the scope that they shouldn't or just can't matter. Yet at the same time, if there is any chance that they do matter to that, you should be very careful about how you handle them. And with that, that's all I got for you this time. Now it is your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think about anything and everything I had to say here in this video. Or you can, of course, leave a comment or question for a future lightning response or thunderstorm video. All you got to do is start your comment off with "Hey Thor" and then ask away. But whatever you choose to do, leave a comment below. Let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.